Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Years ago, my wife, Beth, who is right back in here somewhere, gave me a sign that says, "Comfort the afflicted, afflict the comfortable." Comfort the afflicted, afflict the comfortable. That's often what Jesus does in a lot of these stories that we hear from the Bible. He does obviously bring great comfort to all of us or we wouldn't be here. He also brings great comfort to those who are around him, healing the sick, the lame, the blind, even raising those from the dead. So he does that, and that's why we are attracted oftentimes to Jesus. But he also brings great challenge oftentimes. In our story today, the lawyer comes to him and asks him, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus doesn't give him an answer, but rather he tells him a story and then asks him to decide who is your neighbor. And it's challenging because the hero of our story is a Samaritan, not well liked, actually despised by the Jews. And yet Jesus makes him the hero of the story. That would be a great challenge to the Israelites around him, the people he was talking to. Also, probably not my favorite part, the priest walks on by. Also, as does the Levite, which is more like a lay Eucharistic minister, someone on the vestry, someone in a position of leadership in the church. It's very challenging. Jesus was always challenging, but he was also comforting. Made me think of neighbors that I've known over the years. When I was probably 8 years old, I first met Granny. Granny was the grandmother of a friend of mine where I played at their house in our neighborhood. I thought of neighbors as people next door. Well, Granny was not from next door, and Granny was certainly very different from anybody I'd ever met. She was about this tall, had a wonderful junior beehive, if you remember those, glasses, little cat glasses. She was stoned deaf. Now, I didn't know what to make of that, and I was afraid of her. This was something very unusual and new for me. But over the years, I got to know Granny a lot better. Granny turned out to be a wonderful, loving, kind person. My next experience with neighbors was years later, different kinds of neighbors. I was in the hospital recovering from surgery. I'd had a bad reaction to the anesthesia, and there was a man in the room with me. His wife was there. I was probably in my early 20s. I don't know what was wrong with him. I didn't care because I was sick as a dog. Well, this woman stayed with me the entire night and took care of me. My family was out of town. She took care of me all through all of that. Never knew her name. Don't know her to this day. But it reminds me that neighbors often reach out to us in need. We're called to reach out to others. It goes both ways. My third example that I wanted to share with you was a man named John, a neighbor who I met, I guess, about 3 or 4 weeks ago at Church of the Good Samaritan. John is a neighbor partly because he's a client at Volunteer Ministry Center. Volunteer Ministry Center is where we call clients neighbors. That's very intentional because it reminds us of this story and what our obligation is to our neighbors, those that need to be shown mercy. He came in after the service and sat down with a few of us, had coffee and donuts, proceeded to tell us part of his story being out on the street for the last, I don't know how many, 25, 30 years. Very intelligent, very nice, polite, not always what you might think of some of our neighbors on the street. And he explained that to us. He said they often are ignored, stepped past, however you might want to look at it, because people are often afraid of what they might be bringing with them. Often, though, they're all very harmless, most of them. Neighbors are not always what we think. That's what Jesus is challenging us to think about. Also challenging us to think about how do we care for our neighbors, those around us. It's a daunting task. You read in the paper about the floods in Texas. You read about the hurricanes. You read about tornadoes, starvation, war. There's a lot of need out in the world, neighbors that extend beyond what we think of as our usual borders. But we're simply called to respond in whatever way we can. And when we do that, we are doing God's work, even in the smallest of gestures, handing someone a cold bottle of water, pack of crackers to eat. It doesn't have to be anything great, and we are never going to solve the entire problem, but we can solve a small part of it every day we're given the opportunity. Thanks be to God.